The Unearthly Residue. It started with an email, routine, unremarkable, like so many I'd received before. A research request for an environmental anomaly in a forgotten pocket of Appalachia. The details were vague. Soil that wouldn't support life, unusual air quality reports, electromagnetic interference. Enough to pique my curiosity, but not enough to prepare me. I'm Claire Whitaker, a geologist. My job is to read the Earth, to make sense of its stories. Usually those stories involve contamination, oil spills, chemical leaks, the scars humanity leaves behind. But this was different. Birch Grove wasn't just a scar. It was a wound that refused to heal. I arrived on a cold November afternoon, the kind of day where the sun struggles against a thick blanket of clouds. Birch Grove wasn't on most maps, and after seeing it, I understood why. The town was like a photograph, left out in the rain, faded, distorted, and forgotten. The townspeople didn't welcome me. They didn't warn me either, not directly. Their silence was a kind of warning in itself. They watched me with a mix of suspicion and something else I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or pity. One man, an old-timer named Ben, spoke to me briefly at the diner. "You're not the first to go poking around," he said, his voice low and rough, "but no one stays long." I asked him why. "The ground here. It remembers," he said. At the time I dismissed it as superstition. I thought I could handle whatever Birch Grove was hiding. I was wrong. If you're reading this, I need you to understand. I didn't go looking for what I found. It was waiting for me. And now, it's waiting for you. Like and subscribe for more videos. Tell me where you're from in the comments. November 17th, 2023. Birch Grove, Appalachia. The town wasn't on any map I'd ever seen, and after arriving, I understood why. The place had the atmosphere of a waiting room, silent, uncomfortable, as if the whole town was holding its breath. A few buildings lined the main street, a diner, a hardware store, and a post office that looked like it hadn't received mail in years. People glanced at me from behind curtains or stopped mid-conversation when I walked by. I smiled at one man near the diner. He stared back, chewing tobacco, and spat on the ground before disappearing inside. "My name's Claire Whitaker. I'm a field geologist for the Environmental Research Institute. Usually I get sent to places where the ground is sick. Pollution, chemical spills, things that leave scars on the earth. Birch Grove was different. The report said the soil here wasn't just barren. It was wrong. I parked near the diner and went inside, the bell on the door jangling weakly. The woman behind the counter gave me a look like I'd just insulted her mother. "Coffee?" she asked, though her tone implied I should say no. "I'm looking for the old mining site," I said, pulling out my map. "The coordinates should put it about 2 miles north of town." The counter woman exchanged a glance with an older man sitting in the corner. He shook his head, muttered something under his breath, and left without finishing his coffee. "Not much to see up there," she said finally. "I'd still like to check it out," I pressed. That's when Ben appeared, a wiry man in his 70s with a face like cracked leather. "You a scientist?" he asked, his voice gravelly but steady. "Geologist," I said, offering a small smile. He nodded, then leaned in closer. "Ain't the mine you should worry about. It's what came out of it." Before I could ask what he meant, the woman behind the counter snapped. "Enough, Ben. Don't scare her off." Ben ignored her, lowering his voice. "Go if you have to, but don't stay past sundown. The ground there, it remembers." It was cryptic and absurd, but something in his eyes made my stomach tighten. The air felt heavier when I left the diner. Birch Grove wasn't just a town. It was a warning. The road to the site was a narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt, flanked by skeletal trees that seemed to lean in, as if watching me pass. Birch grove shrank quickly behind me, its uneasy silence replaced by an unsettling absence of sound. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just the crunch of my tires and the faint hum of my engine, unnervingly loud against the quiet. I arrived at the coordinates mid-afternoon. The site didn't look like much. A clearing in the woods, bordered by a rusting chain-link fence and a faded sign that read, Birch Grove Mining Co. Closed 1973. Beyond the fence, the ground stretched out in uneven patches, dotted with crumbling stone heaps. It didn't take long for the oddities to emerge. The soil, loose and powdery, clung to my boots like static. My first step into the clearing sent a faint tremor through the ground. Nothing dramatic, but enough to make me stop and glance around. I pulled out my compass to get a reading, but the needle swung wildly, as though it couldn't decide where north was. That wasn't normal. I double-checked my location, but my GPS had gone blank. I knelt to collect a soil sample. The texture was strange, dry, yet slightly sticky, like ash that had been smeared with oil. Holding it up to the light, I noticed a faint iridescence, a shimmer that shifted colors when I tilted the sample. Okay, I murmured, more to myself than anyone. That's new. I set up my equipment, a handheld spectrometer, a digital thermometer, and a sound recorder. As I worked, the air grew thick, heavy, as though carrying a weight I couldn't see. The metallic tang I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, sharp enough to make me wince. The hum started just as I was finishing. Faint at first, a vibration I felt more than heard. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, like the ground itself was exhaling. I froze, holding my breath. A cold sweat prickled my back. Then as quickly as it started, it stopped. I looked around, but nothing moved. No wind, no animals, nothing to explain the sound. It was just me, my gear, and the silence pressing in like a second skin. I packed up quickly, my hands shaking. This place wasn't just strange. It felt alive, and I had the sinking feeling it knew I was here. I didn't sleep that night. Back at the Birch Grove Motel, I sat cross-legged on the bed, replaying the day's recordings on my laptop. The hum I'd felt at the site, it wasn't there. Or so I thought. At first the audio seemed clean, just the sounds of my tools and the occasional scrape of boots against the soil. Then, at the 14-minute mark, something strange happened. The background noise dipped sharply, like the microphone had been swallowed by a vacuum. And then, there it was. A low, rhythmic oscillation, like the pulse of an underwater engine. It rose and fell in uneven intervals, faint but insistent. I cranked the volume higher, holding my breath as I listened. The sound wasn't constant. It shifted in tone and depth, almost as if it were searching. I ran the file through a frequency analyzer. The results didn't make sense. The hum fell outside the range of any naturally occurring vibration, yet it wasn't mechanical either. It was like something organic, but not quite alive. I tried playing the audio again, but my laptop froze. The screen flickered, then went black. Damn it, I muttered, tapping the keyboard. Nothing. I unplugged the charger and restarted the machine. When it booted up, the audio file was gone. Not corrupted. Gone. The folder was empty, as if it had never existed. That's when the motel light flickered. Just once, a brief flutter like an insect caught in the bulb. I brushed it off, blaming the old wiring, but the air in the room had changed. Heavier. Stale. A knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly I got up and peered through the peephole. No one was there. I opened the door anyway, the crisp mountain air biting my face. The hallway was empty. silent except for the faint buzz of the neon vacancy sign outside. When I turned back, I saw it. The soil sample on the desk. It was glowing faintly, a dull greenish hue that pulsed in time with a rhythm I could feel in my chest. I grabbed my phone to record, but the camera app refused to open. A sense of dread swept over me. Whatever I'd brought back from that site, it wasn't just soil, and it wasn't staying put. I barely slept that night. When I finally dozed off, it wasn't rest. It was like my mind fell into something cold and vast. When I woke up, my chest felt heavy, and my hands trembled as I reached for my field journal. The soil sample was still on the desk, but the glow was gone. In daylight, it looked like ordinary dirt again, but I knew better. I scooped some into a sterile container and decided to run some quick tests with my portable kit. First, the texture. It wasn't quite right. Too fine and smooth, almost like powdered glass. When I rubbed a pinch between my fingers, I felt a faint warmth, like static electricity prickling my skin. I washed my hands immediately, but the sensation lingered, a tingling itch I couldn't shake. Next, I added a drop of distilled water to a tiny pinch of the sample. What happened next made my heart race. The water didn't soak in. Instead, it beaded on the surface like mercury, refusing to absorb. Then slowly the bead began to vibrate. I leaned in closer. The vibration wasn't random. It was rhythmic, pulsing in perfect sync with my own heartbeat. "Jesus," I whispered, pulling back. I decided to try photographing the residue. Maybe I could capture the glow I'd seen the night before. But when I pointed my phone's camera at it, the screen distorted. Waves of static rippled across the display, as if the lens were looking into heat waves. The sample wasn't just abnormal, it was reacting to me. The sensation in my hand grew stronger, spreading to my arm, a slow, steady warmth that felt more alive than any chemical reaction should. I checked my skin under the light and saw faint greenish streaks where the residue had touched me. Panic set in. I scrubbed my hand under scalding water, but the streaks didn't fade. They weren't just on my skin, they were in it. I threw the soil sample back into its container, sealing it as tightly as I could, and shoved it into my bag. My heart raced as I stared at my arm. The streaks seemed to shift, almost imperceptibly, like tiny veins crawling beneath the surface. Whatever this residue was, it wasn't inert, and it wasn't letting go. By morning, the streaks had faded, or so I convinced myself. My arm looked normal under the harsh bathroom light, but the tingling hadn't gone away. It pulsed faintly, like an invisible thread tugging at me. I needed answers. The town library was a squat brick building, older than anything else in Birch Grove, and smelled of mildew and dust. A tired-looking librarian barely glanced at me when I walked in. The place was empty, silent except for the occasional creak of floorboards beneath my boots. I started with the town records. It didn't take long to find something odd. The mine. Every mention of it stopped abruptly in 1973, as if it had been scrubbed from existence. No closure reports, no reasons listed, just a blank void where the mine's history should have been. Then I found the map. It was tucked into an old geological survey, dated 1972, marked with faded pencil annotations. The map showed the mine's structure: winding tunnels, ventilation shafts, and a large, dark shape labeled simply as void. I traced my finger over the map, noting the penciled words scrawled next to the void. Air shifts. Breathing back. Don't open. My breath caught in my throat. Breathing back. The words struck something deep in my memory. The rhythmic hum I'd recorded at the site, the vibrating water droplet, the residue crawling under my skin. Whatever they'd found down there, it hadn't stayed buried. I copied the map into my field journal, my hands shaking with each line. The librarian hadn't said a word since I walked in, but I could feel her eyes on me now. When I looked up, she was watching from behind the counter, her face pale and drawn. "You shouldn't be digging into that," she said softly, breaking the silence. I hesitated, my fingers tightening around the journal. "Why?" She opened her mouth to answer, but stopped herself, shaking her head. "Just leave while you can." I left without another word, my heart pounding. Outside, the sky had darkened unnaturally, as though the clouds had decided to press closer to the earth. As I climbed into my car, the faint pulsing in my arm grew stronger. It was as if the residue knew I was closer to uncovering its secret, and it didn't want me to stop. The map haunted me as I drove back to the site. The word void loomed in my thoughts like a warning, but it also felt like a challenge. I had to know what was beneath that ground, what was breathing back. I reached the site just before sunset, the orange light slanting through the skeletal trees. The air felt different this time, denser, colder, as though it had been waiting for me. I set up my equipment quickly, trying to ignore the growing unease that prickled at the back of my neck. A digital thermometer, an electromagnetic field EMF detector, and a frequency analyzer, all tools I'd used countless times. But here, they felt laughably inadequate, like trying to measure the ocean with a teaspoon. At first, everything seemed quiet. The thermometer showed a steady drop in temperature, far below what was normal for the area. The EMF detector pinged faintly, the needle jittering erratically. Then, at precisely 7:13 p.m., everything changed. The ground beneath me trembled, not violently, but enough to make the equipment shudder. The EMF detector spiked into the red zone, its beeping growing frantic. I grabbed the frequency analyzer just as the hum began again, low and resonant, vibrating in my chest like a second heartbeat. I crouched near the soil, recording as the ground rippled faintly, like liquid under a thin crust. My breath fogged in the freezing air, but my skin felt hot, feverish. That's when the residue started to glow. It seeped up from the soil in faint, pulsing streaks, weaving patterns I couldn't begin to understand. They spread like veins, connecting the spots I'd disturbed earlier. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I swore the glow dimmed, as if reacting to the light. I took a step back, my boot sinking slightly into the unnaturally soft ground. The hum grew louder, almost rhythmic, and the patterns on the soil seemed to shift, rearranging themselves like some kind of living language. Suddenly my equipment failed, all of it. Thermometer, EMF detector, even my flashlight. Darkness enveloped the clearing, save for the faint, eerie glow of the residue. And then I felt it. A pull. Not physical, but something deeper. Like the earth itself was reaching for me, drawing me closer. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen, a prisoner of the hum and the glow, staring into the void beneath the surface. I don't remember falling asleep, but I must have. When I opened my eyes, it was morning, or at least what passed for morning in this place. The light filtering through the trees was pale and weak, the sky a muted gray. My body ached, and my mouth was dry as ash. The clearing looked different. My equipment was scattered, some half buried in the soil as if the ground had swallowed it during the night. The residue was gone, or so I thought. When I stood brushing the dirt from my jacket, I saw it on my hands again. But this time, it wasn't just a faint glow. It was moving. Thin greenish veins pulsed under my skin, winding up my arms like ivy. I stumbled back, panic crashing through me, and scrubbed at them with trembling fingers. The sensation was worse than before. Alive, invasive. Then I noticed the ground. The soft earth was marked with intricate, spiraling patterns. They weren't random. They were deliberate, arranged like some kind of organic circuitry. As I followed the designs with my eyes, I felt a pull again, faint but insistent, dragging me toward the center of the clearing. Against my better judgment, I stepped forward. The ground trembled under my boots, and the hum returned, louder, sharper, as if it had been waiting for me to wake. I reached the heart of the clearing and froze. There was a hole now. It wasn't there before. I was sure of it. A perfect circle, about 2 feet across, its edges unnaturally smooth. The air above it shimmered faintly, like heat rising from asphalt. But it wasn't heat. It was cold, so cold it made my teeth ache. I peered into the hole, and what I saw defied logic. It wasn't darkness staring back at me. It was depth, an infinite expanse of shifting green light, swirling and twisting in impossible patterns. The hum grew louder, resonating in my chest, and the veins on my arms pulsed in sync, glowing brighter as if responding to the light below. Then the pull became physical. The ground beneath me gave way, just slightly, and my boots began to sink. I scrambled backward, heart racing, but the hum turned into a deafening roar. Something was moving in the light, something vast and unformed, rising toward me. And in that moment, I realized the void wasn't empty. It never had been. I don't remember how I made it back to the car. The last thing I recall is falling, my knees sinking into the trembling soil as the hum exploded into a deafening roar. My arms were glowing, the veins pulsing brighter with every second, each beat syncing perfectly with the force pulling me toward the hole. And then, nothing. When I woke, I was slumped in the driver's seat, my car parked crookedly at the edge of Birch Grove's main street. My gear was piled haphazardly in the back, though I didn't remember packing it. The streaks on my arms were gone, but the skin felt wrong, tight, almost alien. The town was even quieter than before. No cars, no people, not even the faint hum of electricity from the neon vacancy sign at the motel. Birch Grove wasn't just silent. It felt erased. I drove without stopping, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds. The pull was still there, faint but undeniable, tugging at the edges of my consciousness. It wasn't coming from the sight anymore. It was in me now. Back at the motel, I dumped the soil samples and residue onto the desk, desperate for answers. The shimmering substance had spread across the containers, thin veins of light crawling over the glass like roots searching for soil. My laptop flickered to life, though I hadn't touched it. A single file was open, one I hadn't written. It read, "We are the earth. You are the bridge. The void breathes through you now." The words sent a chill through me. My hands trembled as I reached to close the file, but the screen began to ripple, as though the text itself was alive. The glow from the residue intensified, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but the screen wouldn't turn on. The veins under my skin began to faintly glow again, pulsing in time with the shimmer from the desk. The pull was stronger now, no longer just a sensation but a command, a compulsion that gnawed at the edges of my will. I looked down at my arm, horrified, as the veins started spreading again, and for the first time I heard the hum clearly in my head, words forming in its rhythm. "Come back. We are not done with you." The light around me pulsed brighter, and then everything went dark. I'm not sure how much time has passed. Days, weeks. It doesn't matter anymore. I only know that I'm no longer the same person who drove into Birch Grove. I've tried to leave, to escape whatever this is. I drove for hours in every direction, but no matter where I go, I always end up back here. Birch Grove, or what's left of it, feels like the edge of the world. The roads twist and loop like the patterns in the soil, leading me in circles until I give up and stop. The streaks under my skin aren't streaks anymore. They're roots. They pulse with a faint greenish light, crawling up my arms, across my chest, and down my legs. I've stopped trying to scrub them off. They're part of me now. I hear the hum constantly. It's no longer faint or distant. It's in my head, a rhythmic cadence that never stops. Sometimes it whispers fragments of meaning, alien yet disturbingly familiar. Other times, it's just a vibration, like the earth itself is speaking through me. I returned to the clearing once, hoping to destroy whatever I'd unleashed. The hole was still there, but it was larger now. The patterns on the ground had expanded, glowing faintly even in daylight. The pull was overwhelming, dragging me to the edge. I stood there for hours, staring into the void, the swirling green light below calling to me. And for the first time, I understood. This isn't just a place, it's a doorway. Birch Grove didn't die because of what the miners found. It died because they tried to seal it away. But you can't bury something like this. It's alive, ancient, and relentless. It breathes, it spreads, and now it's using me. I'm the bridge, the link between what's below and everything above. The hum told me this in its rhythm, its language carved into my veins. I've stopped resisting. The fight drained out of me the moment I realized it wasn't just pulling. I was feeding it. Every breath, every thought, every step I take seems to bring it closer to the surface. I write this now not as a warning, but as a confession. Whatever I am now, I won't be for much longer. The void is rising, and soon it won't need me anymore. Like and subscribe for more videos. Tell me where you're from in the comments.